Good morning, everyone. Frank Chance, Paul Shipman. Today we're going to be presenting on the Central Coast Hydrologic Region pilot study that we've done as part of the Water Budget Framework project. Specifically, we're going to be talking about deriving water budgets and some of the multi-cropping analysis we've done as part of this project. Before we get into it, there's a lot of people that have worked on this project that we want to acknowledge. The co-authors are Abdul Khan, Saqib Najmus, and Julie Haas. And then we also got a lot of help from other staff at DWR, Mortiz Arang, Steve Ewer, Robert Vasneau, and Todd Hilaire. They all were crucial to helping us with the analysis for this project. So first, a little bit about the Water Budget Framework, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. The Water Budget Framework builds on the Water Plan's water budget methodology to implement the vision for the water budget methods developed by DWR staff in 2016. DWR was looking for a defensible method of estimating watershed-based water budgets that allow for flexible spatial and temporal scales. And the idea was that through this process, we would accomplish several things. First of which was to evaluate the current water budget data and methods used within DWR. There's a lot of different models and methods for calculating water budgets, so we wanted to take a look at all of these and kind of evaluate which ones were more defensible, more feasible, and what to use moving forward. The second was to define a consistent method with common vocabulary. Across all these different methods, there are different vocabulary terms used to refer to the same water budget components. Vice versa, the same term could also be used to refer to different components. So through this process, we wanted to come up with some consistency in that. And finally, we wanted to develop a water budget framework. And by that, we mean it's a generalized approach that can be used by DWR or GSAs and local agencies to develop consistent water budgets. And in doing this, the project consisted of two phases. The first phase was the Tulare Lake Hydrologic Region pilot study that was done about a year ago. And that one accomplished several things. Using the CWEMF model in the Tulare Lake Hydrologic Region, we were able to develop using that to develop common vocabulary for water budget terms. There was also some resolution of data inconsistencies between the CWEMF model and some other data sources to make sure we had consistent results. And then we also developed the water budget dashboard, which we'll be showing some slides for later. One of the things that came out of that first phase of the study was the water budget schematic. This is a schematic that we developed that essentially encompasses the essential aspects of your total water budget. So you have your stream and river system, your land surface system, and your groundwater system. For the second phase of the project, our focus was on the Central Coast Hydrologic Region. So the Central Coast essentially is about 7 million acres, and it extends from Santa Cruz in the north coast down to Santa Barbara in the south, along the coast of California. The Central Coast Hydrologic Region was selected for this portion of the study for several reasons. First of which is its dependency on groundwater. In the grand scheme of California, it uses only about 1.1 million acre feet of groundwater a year, but if you look at its total supplies, it's the most dependent on groundwater of any hydrologic region in California. 86% of its water supply comes from groundwater, so it's almost essentially all pumping. Secondly, there are a lot of high and medium priority basins in the region. Of the 60 groundwater basins, 24 are classified as medium or high priority. 6 of the state's 21 critically overdrafted basins reside in this hydrologic region. And a couple of other important aspects was there's no single comprehensive integrated hydrologic model in the area. There's a lot of local models, but unlike the first phase of the project where we looked at the Tulare Lake Hydrologic Region, in that phase we had the CWEMF model to draw upon to do an analysis of the entire area. In this case, a model like that does not exist. And finally, there's limited land and water use data. in the Central Coast, a lot of this data is well documented and well known. In the Central Coast, it's a little bit more scarce. So as part of this analysis, we were looking to develop water budget information from a number of different sources. The first was looking at existing models. As I mentioned, while there's no single model that covers the area, there are a number of local models that we evaluated. We also looked at the California Water Plan's water portfolio method. So as part of the California Water Plan updates, they develop a water budget for each hydrologic region. So we drew upon some of the information from that. And finally, we looked at local reports and knowledge. A number of the local agencies in the area publish information about their water use, and we were able to draw from that to develop some water budgets. So initially, 17 models were considered for evaluation as part of the study, and the criteria for selecting the models were the public availability of the model, the calibration period of the model, and the spatial coverage of the model. So 5 of the models were still under development at the time of the study, so we weren't able to evaluate those. 7 of them didn't have simulation periods past the 1990s, so for the purposes of this study, they weren't particularly useful. We ultimately decided to use the Pajaro Valley model and the Cuyama Valley models. Both of these were developed by the USGS, and they're ModFlow models. The Pajaro model uses the farm process, and the Cuyama model it runs on ModFlow OWHM. So in the first phase of the project, we developed the schematic using the C2V sim, and that was based on the IWFM framework. In this phase of the project, because we were using ModFlow models, that required us to evaluate what the outputs of ModFlow models were and how we would map that to the water budget schematic. The modular framework of ModFlow applications allows for a lot of customization in terms of how users implement their models and what packages you want to do. The one downside to that for this study is the mapping that we did is specific to these setups. So if somebody implements a different version of the model, it's not going to work perfectly. The water budget schematic is essentially broken into 3 different systems. You have your surface water system, which essentially encompasses your lakes and reservoirs and your streams. Your land surface system, that essentially is your applied water, your water use, diversions, runoff, precipitation. And then your groundwater system, that's everything in your aquifer. So what enters the aquifer, either a subsurface flow or deep percolation, what leaves it through groundwater extraction. For the land surface system, we were able to pull most of the water budget terms from the ModFlow farm package. So the farm process is essentially ModFlow's land surface component. It accounts for all the inflows and outflows out of your specified land surface. And the farm process is developed using predefined farms. So a farm in ModFlow is essentially any land area that you specify. It's a group of model cells, and in that you specify its demands and what water it receives. And essentially calculations are done at the farm level. One thing to note is a farm isn't always an agricultural farm. You can define an urban area as one of these units. So in that, the farm budget output essentially includes all of these outputs. The only difficulty is if you have a model and you have your farm budget, it doesn't necessarily differentiate between use type. So if you're looking at your budget, it'll have your total groundwater pumping, but you'll have to look at which individual farm you're looking at to know, if it's urban or if it's agricultural. The water surface system, we were able to get these terms from the stream reach budget. if you have a lake or reservoir that's simulated using the lake package, then the lake budget output would also provide these output terms. So the stream reach budget essentially provides your water balance at every model cell that is specified as a stream. This is very useful for users because the user is allowed to essentially aggregate it at whatever spatial scale they want, extracting the cells that are of interest. For a larger model, it can be a little difficult or a little overwhelming in terms of the data processing, simply based on the number of cells that you have to evaluate and aggregate. And finally, the groundwater system, ModFlow's zone budget allows you to aggregate any collection of model cells, and it provides the total inflows and outflows out of this specified area. So you have all your subsurface inflows and outflows, and then any sort of pumping or recharge would also be captured in this. It's important to distinct that within this zone that you select for your zone budget, everything of a certain type will be aggregated, so all your pumping will show up in a column for your well pumping, and if you want to split that between use type, you'll have to know, what part of that zone is for urban or agriculture. But overall, we were able to extract the relevant water budget components from one of the 4 module outputs, and through that we were able to map it to the water budget schematic, which we'll show you a little bit later.
So as Frank mentioned, the ModFlow models only covered a small portion of the Central Coast, so we had to have another way to assess the rest of the Central Coast. And to do that, again, one of our other goals was to use only existing data and models. So we leveraged the California DWR's calcimetal model, which is a land surface soil moisture model that uses land use as an input to it in order to estimate ET of applied water, and then by extension applied water. So in order to do that, one of the large challenges we ran up against in the Central Coast is this concept of multi-cropping. So multi-cropping occurs when you have the same or different crops grown 2 or more times in the same field within a single year. It happens in many places in the state, but it happens extensively in the Central Coast. And so it's not often picked up with land use surveys because they're typically done only once or twice throughout the year, and so they can't tell you what was grown on that field, 2 months earlier or 2 months after the land use survey. So our goal was to find some way, using only existing data, that to have a method to identify multi-cropping that was traceable and reproducible. So we started with the data sources, and here we have 4 very common data sources used in land use and 1 uncommon data source. So the DWR county land use surveys, which are, of course, a great resource. The Ag Commissioner's reports for each county. We're to skip that one. Go Farm Advisor correspondences. Farm advisors have a very extensive knowledge of what happens in their regions, which was very useful to us. And the Monterey County Water Resources Agency maintains groundwater extraction summaries that have a wealth of knowledge about the area, including groundwater extracted, crops grown, and relative ET. Finally, the California Pesticide Information Portal was a new source that we are using in this analysis. So this was actually a concept that was originally proposed to be used by Randy Hansen, Wesley Henson from the USGS, that they used it in their some of their Salinas Valley modeling. And they presented that last year, and we thought that was cool, so we contacted them to ask, how did you do this? And they gave us a suggestion of taking information from CalPIP, which gives a count and an acreage of treated crops every time they're done. So the problem with CalPIP is that pesticide information is not actually directly corresponding to actual growing. Some crops have more pesticides use, some crops have less pesticide use. However, it is an indicator of existence of the crop, and it's also an indicator of density of the crop at a particular time period. So to add to that, we also used information from Michael Kahn, the local farm advisor with the Cooperative Extension of Monterey County. He gave us several example locations where various crops were grown. Shown here is just broccoli for example purposes. So we combined those together to create a distribution of broccoli in this particular DAU county throughout the year based off the information. So crop periods were set based off the Monterey County farm advisor information, and then the concentrations were derived from overlaying those time periods onto this pesticide count and coming up with a concentration. Using that, we developed a full multi-cropping scheduling throughout the Central Coast. So what you'll see, the scheduling itself, we kept constant because there wasn't enough information to vary it, but the concentrations of each of those periods do change spatially and temporally. So while in this case, broccoli is being shown as 24% in the first period, 36% and 40%, in another DAU county that might be significantly different. Using this information, we plugged it into CWEMF in order to actually calculate applied water. So the preliminary results, this is the exciting part. So the preliminary results, the study period was from 2002 to 2015. In that range, the applied water estimates are within minus 11% to positive 12% difference between reported measured use in Monterey County, with the average percent difference of less than 1.5%. And the other really significant finding we had was that using this multi-cropping scheduling actually reduced the overall amount of applied water calculated compared to what was previously being used of a single consolidated period for all of these crops. So then this information, along with the model information that Frank discussed, was then incorporated back into these Central Coast dashboards to create a comprehensive view of the information that we did have available for the Central Coast. And these are based off of the dashboards that were developed for the Tulare Lake pilot project. And here you see, this is the crop ag dashboard. We only have a few snapshots of dashboards here. And we're able to develop most of the information, because this is the information we used in CWEMF. Supply and demand, there is acres of various crops. But as you go through the different dashboards, you'll find that some of the information we weren't able to calculate, because we didn't have an integrated groundwater model in many of these areas. So you end up with times when we had to add, we know part of the inflow to the groundwater system, but there's a part that we don't know. Same for the outflow. We know part of the outflow because of the agricultural mix, but there's a part that we don't know, which really highlights the reason why we really need integrated hydrologic models in every region in order to properly assess what is going on. Again, this is another breakdown of the various elements, showing elements we did know and elements we couldn't derive. However, in areas like the model areas, as Frank said, we were able to derive all the elements and come up with a full groundwater budget. So this is obviously a very abbreviated version of the report. We'd love the actual report goes into much more detail on these various aspects. It's in internal review right now, and hopefully we can share it with you sometime in the future.